Hello. Galen Marek was a man born during the era of the Empire and Star Wars legends. What if Anakin Skywalker trained Galen Marek? With Galen being born before the Clone Wars and trained by Anakin Skywalker, would he become a dominant Jedi? Or would the pull of the dark side lead him astray as it later did Anakin? Special thanks to Artsabers for sponsoring our 75,000 lightsaber subscriber giveaway. All the details are in the pinned comment down below. Our story begins within the first few months of the Clone Wars during the Battle of Christophsis. A young man by the name of Galen Marek accompanied a young Togruta female by the name of Ahsoka Tano. Obi-Wan had requested a Padawan for himself, but also one that Yoda thought would make a good fit for Skywalker. Galen was that choice. The young man was vibrant, but he also had a very similar development to Anakin. Galen looked up to Anakin already, which is why at such a young age he too wore black robes. Galen believed they fit him better anyways. Anakin thought this to be rather odd, but he didn't question it. Ahsoka, on the other hand, gave the information that Obi-Wan needed and joined her new master. Ahsoka was a bit snippy to start with, but Obi-Wan would handle that the same way he did with Skywalker. Galen, on the other hand, was eager, excitable, and really already a reflection to Anakin of his younger self. However, Anakin hadn't yet picked up on that. He just saw Galen as a young copycat. It was mostly because of the black robes, though. The kid had a serious issue with anger as well, but Anakin also hadn't seen that, but he could feel it. The boy was very powerful, but it wasn't mitigated. Galen's midichlorian count was high-ish. It sat closer to that of Obi-Wan and Plo Koon's around the 13,000 to 14,000 range, which was relatively high. However, for so much potential power, Galen didn't have it all refined. He was, to a certain extent, helpless. So much potential, but not refined in a manner that would assist his growth. Anakin could see that too. It wasn't that the Jedi failed Galen, more so it was that he failed himself. He was trained, but because he was so naturally talented, he never took his training seriously. He was able to breeze past all of his work, whereas Jedi like Kenobi and Plo made themselves to the Council through hard work and dedication alongside of their talents. It was a staggering difference though. But Anakin, to an extent, was the same way, always impatient, trying to do this and that, believing that the Jedi were holding him back, when they were always just trying to help him refine his abilities, which he could either take with appreciation or with disgust, depending on the day, obviously. Regardless, the two of them would have to get acquainted. Anakin wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of having a Padawan without his permission to have one, but he liked challenges, so he might as well welcome this new challenge. Galen would certainly be a challenge for Anakin because he was, well, Galen. The two of them would have plenty of time to bond as they were dispatched to the back lines of the Separatists, and then shortly afterwards sent to Teth to recover Jabba the Hutt's son. It would be on Teth where the two of them would facilitate a master and student bond, while on Christophsis, Galen orchestrated his abilities to listen by not setting off dozens of killing droids in the back of the Separatist lines. It didn't make their bond strong, it just meant that Galen was a good listener. Ahsoka, on the other hand, told Obi-Wan that Jedi don't run when he was trying to play the negotiator with the Separatist General Loathsome. That was a rocky start to their relationship. Regardless, when Galen and Anakin approached the monastery on Teth, they were able to get the son of Jabba the Hutt. Of course, shortly after, according to Dooku's plans, Asajj Ventress would show up and her droids would make short work of the surviving clones. With the battle ensuing, Ventress would find herself against Galen and Anakin. During their short skirmish, Asajj would cut off Galen's dominant forearm, thrusting him into a world of pain. Anakin felt terrible about this, but he got his student to a landing platform on an adjacent rock formation. On the landing platform, they would get into an old rickety ship and take their time. They had to take their time because Anakin, having lost his forearm before, had to help his student through it. It was a weird feeling when one lost a body part. They had trouble with it. They always felt like it was still there, having spent an entire lifetime with it being there, and suddenly it wasn't. The Force only enhanced those feelings. At this moment, Anakin could see Galen's rage for the first time. He was really upset and it hurt like hell, but he turned angry, fueling himself with the dark side. Anakin wasn't exactly sure how to handle the situation properly, so he tried to coax his student through this problem. While he was doing this, the Republic Venator was also getting a transmission from R2-D2 that the ship they were in was going to be trying to land in the hangar bay. Skywalker sat in the bay with Galen and got some sense into him, trying to teach the young Jedi to understand that not everything was terrible. Sometimes stuff like that happens, expressing that as a Jedi they were meant to come to peace with both the stuff they agreed with, but also the stuff they did not agree with. Anakin removed part of his sleeve, showing where his arm was lost, telling Galen that he understood more than most could. Losing part of you was painful, but also losing all of your emotions that followed would only push you further down that path that you didn't want to be on. It would dissociate you from the you want to be. Anakin asked Galen if he really wanted to be that person, and the young Jedi shook his head. He understood what Anakin was saying. It was a weird moment for the two of them. Anakin spoke Galen's language, and Anakin asked himself if he was actually really naturally good at being a teacher. Really a bizarre occurrence, but they both understood each other. It was a moment that would absolutely define their relationship as master and apprentice. Anakin told Galen that if they could get to the command ship, they would be able to get him patched up and then get Jabba's son the care he needed, though Anakin asked Galen if he could be strong for the moment until that came. Galen nodded his head. The ship sped into the battle above, and R2 already having sent the codes for the vessel informing them of who they were, a group of wings were already prepared for this, escorting the trashy ship into the hangar bay safely. When they got in, Anakin and Galen got out. Anakin carried the Hutt child on his back and walked with his student to the medical bay. The two of them got Jabba's child all the necessary care that he needed, and then, when Jabba's son was sleeping, Anakin joined Galen. This was another defining moment. Anakin found a way to get his student to laugh, even with the loss of what he had lost. Anakin simply said, "It was always really cool when you lost an arm because you could always choose the new one you wanted. You could make it the way you wanted to." Galen found this joke a little odd, but for the first time around any other Jedi, Anakin removed the sleeve over his missing forearm, revealing a gold-covered metallic arm. He told Galen in a short moment of vulnerability that when he was a boy, he painted his pod racer in the colors of gold and blue. The first starship he ever flew was a golden N1 starfighter on Naboo. He told Galen that this was to symbolize his past, and while his natural arm may have no longer remained, he would carry this arm with him into the future. Galen asked if it was like a tattoo, to which Anakin nodded his head, but threw another joke in for good measure, except a tattoo can't move around like this. It can't grab things, and it sure as hell doesn't look as good as this. He told Galen that when they got to Coruscant, they'd have a much better selection, but for the time being, they would have to set up with anything they had here. It turned out what Galen wanted was one of the models they already had on the ship. I know, super common for clone troopers to need replacement arms, but they had like 3 or 4 just in case clones or anyone just needed a replacement. Galen picked an all-black one. Anakin asked why he always chose to wear black markings. Galen smiled and said that it set him apart. Anakin knew that wasn't the full answer and showed dissatisfaction with it. Galen sighed and looked away, honestly, a bit embarrassed, because the reason he did it is because he wanted to be just like Anakin. His entire childhood, he heard stories of Anakin Skywalker and wanted to be like him. Anakin was his hero, and when Grandmaster Yoda assigned him to Anakin, he didn't know how to react, especially because Galen was never selected by a master. He finished his trials, but many of the Jedi saw him as too volatile to be their student. Caleb Doom got to be with Master Depa Billaba, another kid in the class got to be with a Trandoshan Jedi, Master Usk or whatever his name was, and he was left by himself. Ahsoka had already been chosen earlier in the day by Kenobi, but picked up by Plo Koon and taken to the vessel where she'd be transferred to Christophsis. Galen remembered sitting in the training room after all his peers had left and thinking that he was all alone. No one wanted him. Then the little green Grandmaster came in with a joyous little smile and told him that he got to be Anakin Skywalker's Padawan. The story truly touched Anakin. It was very sweet, and he didn't realize up until this moment that there were individuals in the Order that looked up to him in that aspect. He knew he was rather outrageous to most Jedi, and he assumed that that was just consistent throughout most of the Jedi Order, all the way down to the younglings. When Anakin and Galen got to Tatooine, they got Jabba his son and departed back for Coruscant. Anakin would be assigned a fleet with 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers alongside Admiral Yularen, who was so excited to have 2 temperamental Jedi war criminals with him. Because not for nothing, Galen picked up on everything that Anakin did. The war would go off to a terrible start for the Republic, but the Anakin and Galen dynamic would be surely one of the best on his path. It's not that Galen didn't have issues, but unlike Ahsoka, where she was more vocal about some of her personal issues, Galen shoved them deep down. It was a very toxic choice, but he did it because he didn't want to disappoint Anakin. That was the trouble with being assigned to a Jedi that you looked up to the most in the galaxy. Galen so desperately didn't want to disappoint his master, and because of that, he was cursed to hiding his flaws. Naturally, Anakin just assumed that Galen was being open with him about his own flaws, but that was far from the truth. Anakin wasn't a mind reader. Galen's flaw was trying to be Anakin, and he just couldn't do that. Anakin didn't realize this early on. Of course, Galen losing his arm wasn't a part of the plan, and it was just more so irony that they both ended up losing their dominant arm. Regardless, Galen would have to prove to be a fine commander of the 501st. He would do this at the Battle of Ryloth, and he would prove it really well, as he wouldn't engage Separatists when they launched their counter-assault, allowing the capital ships to escape without being destroyed or badly damaged. This would leave Admiral Yularen and Anakin alive to come up with a plan, but it turns out Galen had another plan. He suggested they move all the bombers to another ship, deployed on the far side of the blockade, release the bombers from there, allow the other 2 ships to engage the fleet, and then Anakin would lead the fighter assault with V-19s and Galen would lead all the bombers. It would be the perfect strategy as it would work beautifully, just in time for Mace Windu and Kenobi to show up with their assaults of their own on the planet to free the Twi'leks from the Separatists. This effort would have Galen prided in his master's eyes. To Galen, it was one step closer to becoming his own hero. Everything for both Master and Apprentice would be smooth sailing until the holocron crisis, which is only a few months afterwards. Galen and Anakin were trying to recapture a holocron from a bounty hunter named Cad Bane. He was extremely powerful, and Galen, for the first time, didn't listen to his master's orders and chased down Cad Bane, which only led to him being captured by the talented bounty hunter. When Anakin arrived, he was forced to negotiate with Cad Bane, which he really didn't want to do. But Galen, during this time, managed to free himself from his locks, and everything he'd been shoving down beneath him rose up, and he turned into an angry Jedi. Standing up as he got himself up, everyone, including his master, was lifted off of the ground. It wasn't that he was stronger than Anakin by any means, but his unsuspecting master wasn't prepared to defend himself from it. Cad Bane was being choked to death, and the two battle droids were crushed simultaneously. Galen let out a terrible scream of rage, throwing the room around, slamming Anakin into a door panel and turning his attention to Cad, lifting him up off the wall, crushing the air tubes on his neck, and forcing the Duro's bounty hunter to suffocate. Anakin called out to Galen, but when he did, his student turned around with a possessed hiss of anger. It shocked Anakin. He saw Bane's eyes. They were more red than ever before, and in his final moment of life, his eyes popped out and he dropped to the floor lifelessly. The holocron on the ground had an inkling of crimson on it, as if Galen's use of the dark side had corrupted the holocron ever so slightly. Skywalker couldn't believe what he'd seen. Galen himself fell to the ground unconscious, and Anakin was faced with his reflection on the wall. It wasn't definitive, but it gave him a message. Anakin looked down on the ground and picked up the holocron, using the Force to piece it back together and then picking up his student and running back to the clones for their pickup. When Galen woke up, several hours later, Anakin was sitting silently on the far side of the room. He was running through his thoughts, and he couldn't really come to a conclusion. He was directed by Master Yoda to return to the temple, because after seeing the holocron turn, he reached out to Master Yoda, who would show him how to rectify that. But part of Anakin was nervous. He didn't explicitly say that Galen did it, but he knew that Yoda was aware of what had happened. He was the Grand Master, after all. So it was very unlikely that Yoda wouldn't figure out what happened. So he requested they come back to the temple so that they could fix the holocron before all the information was lost, and secondly, talk to Galen. While his student was knocked out, Anakin blamed himself solely for what had happened, believing that his rather rambunctious teaching habits encouraged Galen to use the dark side as such. Seeing what young Galen could do with the dark side worried him for what could be done regarding himself. How powerful would he become if he allowed that same darkness to corrupt himself? According to the Jedi, he was a chosen one, and a higher midichlorian count than Yoda. That kind of power in its own way scared him. It's because he could very easily destroy everything he loved. Anakin knew Galen wouldn't want to hurt him, but being blinded by his anger and his rage and everything because he refused to talk about his problems or express emotionally or just verbally, it all flooded out in one hateful action and it hurt the ones Galen cared about, specifically Anakin. If the clones were there, they would have likely been killed. While Anakin blamed himself, he didn't realize that it had been Galen who was withholding this information from Anakin. In retrospect, it could be positive because Anakin would be able to correct his wronging and possibly change some of the attributes about himself that were negative. Galen called Anakin's name and Skywalker rose quickly and ran to his student's side and asked how he was feeling. Galen didn't answer and immediately jumped into an apology. He couldn't believe he used the Force on his own master and he felt terrible for doing such a heinous thing to Anakin, but Anakin cut him off, telling him that he was not to be of blame. Anakin was his Jedi Master, and he should have handled it in a much more mature way than that. He should have been training Galen, not giving him reasons to use powers that Jedi shouldn't be using. Anakin knew he couldn't continue teaching like this. It was all his fault. He wouldn't let Galen be punished for this, because likely the Council would take it out on Galen. Galen was confused for Anakin's response, because he knew it was his fault, suppressing his feelings and all that. It wasn't a typical Jedi way of close down your emotions and trust the Force. What Galen did was more inherently negative, something that not even Anakin did. It was every little word that he wanted to say, every question, anything he might want to know. Galen feared being embarrassed, so he hid it all, and it built up like a volcano, and when it was triggered, it was sent into a blind fury. He pleaded and tried with Anakin, but his master was very adamant about taking the blame for this. When they arrived at the temple, Skywalker apologized for what had happened, informing the council that it was his own ignorance that allowed Galen to become in such possession of those powers. But truthfully, the council didn't really bat an eye to this. Instead, Yoda got up from his seat and requested Anakin to join him alone in the garden on the temple. Galen was dismissed back to the hangar bay to wait for his master. Anakin and Yoda went in the garden and sat down. It was in the winter months, so a chilly breeze shot across the courtyard as the last leaf of the tree fell off. Yoda asked Anakin if the tree was dead, and so he shook his head. It wasn't. The Grand Master turned his attention to the holocron and informed him that neither was a holocron. They can manipulate it like the seasons do to the tree. but it would never die until its natural time came. Anakin didn't really understand. Yoda sat down and closed his eyes, lifting up the holocron and gently using the Force on it. Anakin watched as a little crimson layer vanished, and it was once again pure with light. Yoda smiled at Anakin and told him that the council was not disappointed in him. Anakin expressed his sorrow for what had happened, suggesting that he should have been a better teacher in the moment. Yoda again shook his head and asked Anakin to sit, so he did. The two of them sat next to each other, looking at the tree. Anakin asked what Yoda was suggesting, and with a little chuckle, that Galen was assigned to Anakin for a reason. The Jedi knew Galen looked up to Anakin, but they also knew that Galen had troubles controlling his emotions. While Galen wasn't introduced to the Jedi at 10 years old like Anakin was, he didn't develop Jedi-like habits off the bat, and still obviously hadn't. The council assigned him to Anakin because it would be a reflection of Anakin's true self. With Anakin not rejecting the Force as a whole, he would allow Anakin to use the dark side, and it would be just enough at one point or another that it would wake Anakin up. Yoda expressed that he did nothing wrong aside from what the council expected him to do. Anakin looked very confused, and then it clicked. Should he be upset, or should he understand? Yoda told Anakin that it wasn't exactly his fault. He was human. His emotions were human, and so the council allowed a boy similar to him to show him exactly what those raw emotions could do. Yoda realized this shortly before the Battle of Geonosis, when Anakin was in great suffering. It was when Anakin slaughtered the Tusken Raiders. Yoda didn't know about the Tusken Raiders, but when Yoda said the words before the Battle of Geonosis, Anakin knew exactly what the Master was talking about. Yoda said that Anakin didn't necessarily do anything wrong, and he shouldn't be so hard on himself. However, Yoda asked Anakin if this by any means changed his own stance on how he would handle future events. Anakin told Yoda that in a way he felt like he was being set up by the council, but it wasn't that they wanted him to fail, just to understand. They wanted him to see how he could easily scare himself, which Anakin at this point realized was true. Anakin understood what the lesson was, and the short stint in the Temple Garden would permit Anakin to go forward. When Anakin and Galen made their way back to the fleet, Galen apologized profusely, assuming that Anakin got in trouble. He told Anakin that he'd been hiding his own feelings and suppressing his questions and everything because he didn't want to embarrass himself. It bubbled up and then it bursted, and it was all his fault, and Anakin shouldn't have taken the blame for him. Anakin found this to be interesting, even having in the past catching himself doing this with his wife, Padme, and even doing it to Obi-Wan. Not being honest, not just with others, but himself. It affected him negatively, and having seen what it did to his young student, he couldn't allow that mindset to plague him or his student anymore. The Jedi came clean with each other, expressing that they would not allow it to happen again. Anakin professing that he would do everything within his power to ensure Galen never felt like that again, and doing everything in his own power to make sure that he himself was fit enough to emotionally handle these situations as a teacher. So, it would be done. The relationship as master and apprentice was built heavily on vulnerability, something that every great master and apprentice relationship had, no matter what Jedi. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan had it, and at this point, Ahsoka was even more understanding of what it was that she was doing wrong, and she wasn't getting away with outlandish behavior. Anakin and Galen now had that same bond, and it would be something that Anakin would have to teach himself and his student at the same time, but he knew he could make it work. Throughout the war, the trio Obi-Wan, Cody, and Ahsoka would be with Anakin, Rex, and Galen. They'd be very tight, and it would be a very strong united front. Of course, not everything can last forever, and while on Cato Neimoidia, Anakin and Galen would be brought back to the temple to investigate a bombing, during which Galen would be accused of the bombing, but because of his training, he'd be prepared, and he would handle it adequately. When he wasn't convicted, and another Padawan, Barriss Offee, was, he would be offered a chance to rejoin the Jedi Order as a Jedi Knight. Galen had a tight bond with his teacher, and while he was almost put to death because of the Council's wrong decision-making, he didn't have a life outside the Order. He had no one to try and start anew. So he stayed, rejoining his master in the 501st as a Jedi Knight. Anakin couldn't be happier, and while this dissuaded him from trusting the Council as much, he was still pleased to be continuously joined by his young, now former student. He and Galen would continue their adventures and fight against the Separatists. Near the end of the war, on the battlefield of Ringovinda, Clone Trooper Tup would execute Jedi Master Tiplar. Both ARC Trooper 5s and Galen Marek would accompany Tup to Kamino. Not that Galen needed much permission to do really anything at this point in his career, he still asked Anakin if he could go. On Kamino, Galen would find that the Kaminoans were up to shady business, and while Fives was undercover, he would learn that the Prime Minister was contacting Count Dooku, otherwise known as Lord Tyrannus. Because shocked he was the only Jedi present, he conducted her for her personal opinion. She suggested that they get Tup and learn about what was infecting him before the Kaminoans did. When they got there, they learned that Tup had died, but Fives was able to remove his inhibitor chip and that of Tup's. While Nala Se tried to explain it away as something that would make the clones a lot less aggressive, after hearing the Prime Minister's conversation with Dooku, Shaak Ti told Galen to take Fives and the inhibitor chips to a shuttle and go directly to the Jedi Temple. She did not trust them at all. The Council would be notified by Shaak Ti, and she would inform the clones of Kamino to lock down the facility. No one would be able to communicate in or out of Kamino. It was as simple as that. Shaak Ti was not messing around, especially if the Kaminoans were cooperating with the Separatists. Galen messaged Anakin and informed him of what was happening. Fives and Galen were boys anyways, so Fives really felt good having a friend there with him. When they arrived on Coruscant, an escort of Jedi got them into the temple. Fives explained everything about these inhibitor chips and what he understood at this point, and the Jedi Council had their scientists explore the chips, opening up the broken one and going through it, seeing what they could find in the brain matter. Fives was sedated so that he could rest. He was having a panic attack, and this would relieve him of his stress. The entire council was gathered in the facility, with Galen watching the scientists project the information from the inhibitor chips. A hologram projected this information onto a board. Mace Windu entered the facility to help with the program, and using the phrase, "I am one with the Force and the Force is with me," he was able to guide the robot to find exactly what it was looking for. The chip was broken, and it was set to Contingency Order 66. It was revealed that the Galactic Republic had them all set up, but this particular one enforced the clones to attack the Jedi for treason against the Republic. The other set of orders would be revealed. Orders 4, 5, 37, 65, 66, and 67. Each of them would be laid out subsequently, and the Jedi would look at all of them. How could they approach this? It was obvious the Separatists didn't know, and obviously the Sith Lord didn't know that they discovered these. The Jedi had to make a choice. They knew that there was someone within the Republic who could activate these orders. So, what could the Jedi do? The Council collected in their chambers and suggested Galen stay here with Fives for the time being. They couldn't keep Kamino locked down indefinitely, so the Council decided on inoculation. It wasn't really an inoculation, but that's what they would call it. It would at the very least hide that they were trying to remove the inhibitor chips of all the clones. The Jedi would then have Shaak Ti apologize. They would provide a false accusation against Galen Marek, and then say that he was removed from the Order. In reality, Galen would just be kept in the Jedi Temple until the Clone Wars were over. It would all be explained in a way that the Sith were unaware of, and swiftly it would be done. The Jedi would place scientists on every major battlefield. Republic scientists, of course, to levy the treatment for the clones, removing all their inhibitor chips and dressing it up as a routine inoculation provided by the Republic. The Jedi would send Yoda himself to apologize for the confusion and show a faked hologram of Galen Marek being removed from the Jedi Order for committing treason on Republic officials. He then expressed that the Jedi Order would pay forward 1 million credits to repair the relationship between the Jedi and the Kaminoans to keep this quiet. Being that they loved their oh sweet greed, the Kaminoans ate it up, and the Jedi continued up their little ruse. Of course, Anakin was instructed to play the game as well, which is something he had to do in front of the Chancellor. Palpatine expressed not having seen a trial for a Jedi on his desk at any point, but Anakin expressed that the Jedi wanted to keep it private for the time being, not lying to his friend, just simply twisting the truth. No one yet really believed Palpatine was a Sith Lord. There were some suspicions, but as they understood, they would just keep a watchful eye until the outcome of the war, which came really quickly. Mandalore wouldn't be invaded with Ahsoka, still Obi-Wan's Padawan, and the attack on the Invisible Hand would have Dooku surrendering instead of being executed thanks to Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin being there. This would lead to Palpatine's disgust for Dooku's survival, and a continuation of his plan, splitting the Council up and forcing Anakin into their ranks. Master Skywalker was already a Jedi Master, but being teased with a position on the Council appointed by Palpatine could only mess with his head. It didn't. And because Anakin, thanks to his teachings of Galen, was able to overcome any animosity he had within himself, he denied the dark side, and so when Palpatine tried to manipulate him, it didn't work. That was until the fateful day that Palpatine literally said he was a Sith Lord and Anakin controlled his demeanor and would kill the Sith Lord. This would have many issues on the Republic, especially with Kenobi having defeated Grievous and being sent immediately to Mandalore to break the treaty against the Mandalorians to assist Bo-Katan and her rebels against Almec and Darth Maul. Windu would be to Anakin's aid, having significantly more trust for him, having been proven himself throughout the Clone Wars as a true Jedi. The Council would reapproach the Senate with their prisoner and inform them that Sidious was indeed Palpatine and Palpatine was indeed behind everything. This would be supported when Shaak Ti and Galen Marek would prove that the Kaminoans were a part of the plan. And while the mass execution of the Jedi wasn't a large concern, some of the other contingency orders were, like a mass execution of an entire planet, or completely arresting or killing the entire Senate. It was insanity, and the Kaminoans would be charged for sedition against the Republic, which was truly an ironic move. They expected to get a massive sum of wealth, but with Dooku's estate frozen and the Republic calling for them to be arrested, they had nowhere to go but down, and down they went. Master Skywalker, on the other hand, would welcome his two twins, Luke and Leia. They would be his greatest joy and his greatest pride. He couldn't believe how happy he was when he was able to welcome them into the galaxy. Padme would back out of politics as her closest allies, Mon and Bail, would divide up the role of Chancellor so it was two independent people who held so much power. They would call for peace with the Separatists and it would be done. Padme, while having suggested they move to Naboo to raise Luke and Leia, would decide otherwise. Anakin was a council member, and he, having enjoyed being a Jedi Master so much, decided to stay and continue his training, keeping a double life that he relished in. He loved it so much. He got to keep his newest student, a Twi'lek girl named Daisha Numa, and he got to watch as Galen Marek became a master himself. On the flip side of his life, he was able to raise his lovely twins, and even incorporate his closest friends into their lives, Galen, Obi-Wan, Rex, and eventually Ahsoka. With Maul defeated by Kenobi and Ahsoka on Mandalore, the Sith were all but extinguished. Dooku would be locked away forever, handless and having given up the extent of Palpatine's plans for a lighter sentence, which wasn't too terrible, only 5 lifetimes in a regular prison, rather than the 10 lifetimes in maximum security. Dooku was social. He'd rather be around people, so he took the deal. Regardless, without the Sith, the Jedi, with Master Skywalker on their council, would be able to issue in a new era of tranquility to a hurting galaxy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. And special thanks to Galavan Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Jack Miller, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Matty Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the man with 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, Flynn Vassis, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button if you want to support the channel. Go check out the Patreon. Otherwise, let's talk about our story. This was fun. So I wanted to tell a story that was uniquely different without taking away the qualities that make Galen who he is. But one thing that had to be done was essentially put him in a year, like a couple years born earlier, because he was born after the Jedi fell, I believe, if I'm not mistaken there. But I wanted him to be born during the era of the Republic so that he could be Anakin's student, instead of being Ahsoka, obviously, and replacing that. And the one thing I really want to talk about here is Anakin and Galen being literally a reflection of Anakin. So what I wanted to do is, with Galen, I wanted him to have, like, this issue with suppressing his emotions, which is very, like, not a good thing to do. And that's, like, the deeper message here, like, don't suppress yourself, because it hurts you. It only hurts others, too. And so I wanted Anakin to see that effect. I wanted Anakin to have, like, a mirror held up to himself and seeing what his actions, what his emotions, how he conducted his emotions could negatively affect other people. And so when Galen almost, like, when he throws him into a wall and kills, like, Cad Bane, Anakin imagines himself doing that to Padme, or doing that to Obi-Wan, doing that to Galen, but I didn't have to explicitly say it. It was intended, it was in the subtext, and that's what Anakin, like, that's what changes Anakin. It's because he sees that Galen can do that, and Galen is nowhere near Anakin's level. And this story, I think, moderately powerful. I don't think I made him too overpowered, but I made him enough of a threat where Anakin would be like, yo, maybe I should not do that. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed the story, fun training story. I got some more training stories coming out soon. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.